Hi everybody, Don Dacurcel here in New Jersey, USA. This is my session analysis for target 7457-8851. I did 4 sessions for this target, which is a lot of data, so I'll be going over session highlights here today. And for those interested, the individual pages of all 4 of my sessions will be available online. The target statement is: the remote viewer will describe the primary cause or causes of the period of climactic change on Earth, commonly known as the Younger Dryas. Okay, this is a climatology target. And to make sure we're all on the same page, I'll briefly review what the established information sources say about it. The Younger Dryas was a cool period roughly between 12,900 to 11,600 BCE, which disrupted the warming temperatures in the northern hemisphere. It produced cooler temperatures that returned parts of Europe and North America to an ice age that lasted approximately 1,300 years. After that, a rapid warming followed. The Younger Dryas was preceded by a sudden warming interval, beginning around 14,700 years ago. This may be the chief contributor to the present hypothetical explanation that the Younger Dryas was caused by meltwater flowing from the heated ice sheets covering much of North America flowing into the Atlantic Ocean. This drainage disrupted the warm currents that heated the globe. Now, other theories for the Younger Dryas suggest volcanic eruptions, or perhaps a large comet was involved. And this is where we start to see some similarity with my first 2 remote viewing sessions. My session summaries give the best overview of this correspondence, and I'll be going over them in a bit, but I'd like to go over a few observational highlights first. I consider every remote viewing session an experiment, and I'm always looking for how my subconscious is communicating, because I want to learn how it talks. I don't consider my session data just data. It's more like something I need to study to understand what it's trying to say and the techniques it uses to say it. During my analysis, I noticed, first of all, an increased number of split ideograms, and here's one. Now, I rarely get these, yet if you've had any remote viewing training, you'll realize the gaps in your pen marks are actually significant. And here's another one. And let's go over this one in detail. The first part here I perceived as a sweeping, curving motion that was traveling and had to overcome some sort of impasse. If we're talking about an interstellar object here, I wonder if the impasse might be the Earth's atmospheric layer. The second part seemed to continue on this theme with the sweeping traveling motion, now cited as coming here emphatically. This sounds like this could be some sort of interstellar object, and the word emphatically hints at some sort of damaging or forceful result. The third part, the gap here, I perceived as a transition, which I now started to feel was the main subject, the primary gestalt. Interesting if you think about it. I declared a break in my ideogram as a primary gestalt. Earlier in my session, I described this further as a space-time transition, something that was affecting both space and time. From what the literature tells us, the Younger Dryas affected physical space in terms of ice sheet meltwater in the Atlantic, and forming another ice age that lasted 1,300 years. So it did indeed affect both space and time. And if you think about it, it's not clear the people of that era understood what was causing their change in the weather. So for them, the rapid flooding and ice age may have seemed mysterious. They didn't have the information we have today, so before our time, the reasons for the Younger Dryas were mostly hidden. Now, later, as I was analyzing this session, I couldn't help but notice the similarity between this ideogram and the Younger Dryas temperature chart I showed earlier. Notice how they both initially curve upward, reach a peak, then descend and bottom out during a space of time, followed by a rapid temperature recovery. Look at how my subconscious conveyed this information, this 1,300-year interval. I got data, let's call it through a mental channel, the words I wrote down in my session, and the ideogram, the visual similarity to the Younger Dryas temperature chart in the encyclopedias, a scribble that came through my nervous system, I guess. Two different information channels. Interesting. One last thing about this ideogram. This wasn't just an ideogram done in sequence. It was an answer to a specific question. This question, you see, earlier in my session I got this ideogram, and that element there labeled complicated. I didn't understand it. So I asked, what is that? What does it mean? And I got this. It just goes to show you how dense the data can be in a single ideogram. In this case, I needed another one to explain a small detail in the first ideogram. And I think that's pretty educational. Now, I mentioned going over my first two session summaries and the data that contributed to them. Let's get on to that now. Session A, Major Aspects. Descriptions that sound like a meeting or an encounter with something in the air. Aerial views, looking down, smooth, gliding, exhilaration, following ad hoc procedures. Followed by a transition, a jolting, lurching forward, fast and deliberate, up and away. An isolated incident. Prestigious. Multiple onlookers. Military and intelligence involvement. People working in a confined space. Feelings of anxiety, nervous tension, overly bureaucratic. A rigmarole and playing it cool. An unknown object. Symmetrical aspects, smooth and shiny. Fast movements together with motionless moments. This was a kind of demonstration. Communication going on. A base surface. This was not clear, sometimes out in the open like a desert or with wood buildings, and other times out on the water. Secrecy. Initial secret, and then some information released to the public. And here's my summary for the second session. Something streaking across the sky. Observed by eye. Unknown methodology. Described as orthotropic. Let me inject a few words here. I heard the word orthotropic here. Okay, who knows what that word means? Raise your hands. When I hear stuff in my subconscious like that, my mind first questions it, like, is orthotropic even a word? And then you wonder how to even spell it. I wrote orthotropic. And phonetically, that's pretty close to orthotropic. And I immediately pulled the definition off of my cell phone and wrote it in session. It means having elastic properties in 2 or 3 perpendicular planes. Now, what does that mean? I went into my 3D modeler to explore the idea. Here's one dimension, and then a second, and finally a third. Now, if I oscillate that elastically, it starts looking to me like a comet or something disintegrating in the atmosphere. Well, that's my take anyway. Sorry for the interruption. Back to my summary review. Patrolling. Uniformed personnel. Reactions. Panic, chaos, danger, alarms, procedural concerns. What to do next? Hands moving quickly back and forth across control panels. People pacing back and forth in confined room space. Base surface again varies, both a dry sandy surface and at other times a naval vessel. So it seems these 2 sessions had strong perceptions of some sort of aerial phenomenon. A crash was mentioned, a phenomenon that affected both space and time and caused people to experience high anxiety and procedural concerns on both land and sea. I also discovered a few interesting items in my remote viewing work, like the ideogram that looked like the Younger Dryas temperature chart. and hearing the words orthotropic and effervescent in my subconscious as descriptions for that aerial phenomenon. One last observation. There were a number of higher technology-oriented perceptions in my sessions. Technology higher than one might expect for 14,000 years ago. People waving their hands near control panels, naval vessels, control rooms, and even one thing that looked like an ET. Whether these things were real at the time will likely never be known, and may have just been metaphors for devices of that era. But if you believe extraterrestrials were inhabiting Earth during this period, they may have been just as inconvenienced as anyone else, wondering what to do, packing and moving elsewhere, especially if there was flooding going on. So there it is. There's a quick summary of my sessions. Thank you for watching.